Last month, I looked at the entire 30-year history of the NHL Draft Lottery, and I attempted to calculate the luckiest and unluckiest teams since 1995. The NBA is the only other professional sports league that has used a draft lottery for a long time, so it felt natural to make a similar video. Now, basketball knowledge occupies an extremely small part of my brain, but in spite of this, I usually watch the NBA lottery every year and follow what's going on, just because it's a fun spectacle. For those who don't know, the NBA draft is an annual event where the teams pick young players to join their franchises. The draft order is designed to be the inverse of the standings. The worst teams get the earlier selections, and the best teams pick later. However, this isn't completely true. Before the draft, there is a lottery that may or may not alter the selection order slightly. This system is in place to prevent teams from intentionally losing games to improve their draft position. It's certainly debatable if it's an effective system, but that's why it's there. Before I made this video, I expected that it would be very similar to the NHL one, but there were several things that made the NBA's lottery history quite unique. From the actual lottery itself, to David Stern's seething hatred of Canada, all the way up to conspiracy theories, we are going to explore everything related to the NBA lottery today, and we are going to find out who the luckiest and the unluckiest teams have been in the past 40 years. Let's start by describing how we are going to make these calculations. Before each draft lottery, we can find out how likely each team is to win the lottery. Often, the odds are published like this. Most of the time, percent chances and probability are terms that are used interchangeably, but they're actually not the same thing. The probability is the decimal representation of a percent chance, and we can calculate it just by dividing the percent chance by 100. For example, this is the percent chance, and this is the probability. Probability notation is far more commonly used in mathematics because many complicated calculations involving likelihoods rely on probabilities and not on percent chances. One of these complicated calculations is finding the expected value of something. The expected value of something is the sum of each possible outcome multiplied by its probability of happening. For example, the expected value of a dice roll would be 1 times the probability of rolling 1, plus 2 times the probability of rolling 2, plus 3 times the probability of rolling 3, plus 4 times the probability of rolling 4, plus 5 times the probability of rolling 5, plus 6 times the probability of rolling 6. And if we add up all of these together, since the probability of each roll is just going to be a 1 in 6 chance, the expected value of a dice roll is going to be 21 over 6. In the context of the NBA draft lottery, one way we can use expected value is to find the expected pick of each team in the draft lottery. So we could do something like this. 1 times the probability of pick 1, plus 2 times the probability of pick 2, plus 3 times the probability of pick 3, plus 4 times the probability of pick 4, and so on. We're going to do this for every possible pick that team can get in the draft lottery. This value represents the average pick that the team would get if we repeatedly did the lottery a very large number of times. Expected values are often complicated numbers involving many decimal places, and it may not be possible to have a draft pick of the expected value, but the expected value represents roughly where the team should be picking with neutral luck. Most of the time, only the probability of winning the lottery is listed. However, we want to know the probability of each team picking at each spot in each draft lottery. We are going to do this in a variety of ways. Some of the lottery odds were calculated manually by me, some of them were taken from the Wikipedia page of that specific draft, and some were simulated a very large number of times to estimate the probabilities. This is known as a Monte Carlo method, and I'm going to talk more about that later. Now, we could calculate every team's expected pick across the last 40 years of NBA lotteries and compare the expected picks to the actual picks obtained in the draft lottery. This may give us a good idea of who has gotten lucky and unlucky, but one flaw in this method is that it wouldn't account for the value of each pick. Pick values are not linear, and the difference between draft picks at the top of the draft is going to be much higher than the difference in consecutive picks much later on. Moving up from pick 3 to pick 1, for example, will generally have a much greater impact than moving up from pick 6 to pick 4, for example. So instead of looking at the expected pick, we're going to be looking at the expected pick value. What I'm going to do is assign each draft pick to a corresponding pick value, which I obtained from this website right here. Then, we're going to calculate the expected pick value of each team like this. The value of pick 1 times the probability of pick 1, plus the value of pick 2 times the probability of pick 2, plus the value of pick 3 times the probability of pick 3, and so on. We're going to do this for every possible pick that team can get. We are going to do this for every single team across every single lottery that has taken place since the first one in 1985. Then, what we're going to do next is calculate the pick value above expected, which can be obtained by taking the pick value minus the expected pick value. If this is a really big positive number, it indicates good luck. It means that the team ended up picking in a higher spot than their expected value. And on the contrary, if this is a really big negative number, this means bad luck. It means that the pick value was below the expected pick value. Then, we can take each team and add up the sum of each pick value above expected, and we can see which teams have benefited the most and which teams have benefited the least from the draft lottery. So, that's exactly what we're going to do. Before we start, I will make one small note about conditionally traded draft picks. In the NBA, there are a lot of monster trades, and many picks are traded with some sort of conditions attached to them, such as the pick only being traded if the pick is outside of the top 3 spots in the draft. In this video, we are going to assume that each pick belongs to the team that would hold the pick in the case of a lottery win. This may not be a perfect rule to implement, but it's important to maintain consistency. Now, let's hop into the time machine and talk about some of the earliest NBA lotteries. 1985 was the first lottery in NBA history, but the draft has actually had some degree of randomness since 1966. From 1966 to 1984, the NBA used a coin flip to decide the first overall pick in the draft. The worst team in each conference would participate. The winner of the coin flip would pick first, and the loser would pick second. I'm not going to include these in our calculations today, but it's still interesting to note. However, this was not very effective at stopping teams from intentionally losing or tanking. The 1984 Houston Rockets were a premier example of this. After starting with a mediocre but respectable 20-26 record, they gave more time to bench players and imploded in the final months of the season, winning only 9 games between February 3rd and April 14th. The Rockets did end up winning the coin flip and selecting Hakeem Olajuwon, and it's hard to argue that that was the incorrect choice. The NBA realized that this sort of tanking was still going on, and they promptly introduced a more robust draft lottery system to prevent the same thing from happening again. The 1985 lottery was the first in NBA history, and honestly, it was so beautifully simple. They brought out this massive machine, put 7 cartoonishly oversized envelopes into the machine, with these 7 envelopes corresponding to each non-playoff team. Then, they jumbled up the envelopes and picked them out one by one. The order in which the envelopes were taken out would become the draft order. So the bottom 7 teams, from worst to best, were the Pacers, Warriors, Knicks, Kings, Clippers, Supersonics, and Hawks. In this lottery, each team had a 1 in 7 chance of getting each of the 7 picks, and if we make a table of the probabilities, it would look something like this. We are going to order the teams by their lottery seed like this. The lottery seed refers to where the team would be selecting if the lottery didn't alter the draft order at all. Then, we could calculate the expected pick value of each team. For the 1985 draft lottery, that would look like this. 100, the pick value of 1, times 1 in 7, the probability of picking first, plus 77.5, the pick value of pick 2, times 1 in 7, the probability of pick 2, and so on. Here's what the entire thing would look like. And, if we plug in these numbers, this equals approximately 66.1984. Because this lottery is completely unweighted for all picks, where every team has the same odds, each team will have the exact same expected pick value. Then, the draft order was the following. The Knicks were first, the Pacers second, the Clippers third, the Supersonics fourth, the Hawks fifth, the Kings sixth, and the Warriors seventh. And, if we compare each team's expected pick value to their actual pick value, here are the results. The Warriors, unsurprisingly, were the biggest loser, dropping to 7th. The Knicks were the big winners, getting the first overall pick, which they used to select Patrick Ewing. Many were suspicious that the lottery was rigged, and that the envelope belonging to the Knicks was chilled or something, so that the commissioner would be able to tell which one was theirs without seeing it. Nonetheless, this has never been proven, so we are going to assume that this lottery was done honestly. The 1986 lottery was conducted identically. Here were the 7 teams participating. There was a weird condition where the Cleveland Cavaliers would pick immediately after the Mavericks, but they couldn't pick higher than 3rd. For every lottery with weird restrictions like this, I used Monte Carlo methods to approximate the probabilities of each pick. Calculating these probabilities manually would be very difficult, so I designed a code that simulated the draft 8 million times. The whole idea of the Monte Carlo method in this case is that if we simulate the draft lottery a very large number of times, the fraction of times that each team got each pick will be very similar to those probabilities of each pick. And here were the results. The 76ers were the biggest winners, and the Mavericks were the biggest losers. The first 2 lotteries were quite chaotic, with some teams moving all over the place dramatically. Starting in 1987, only the top 3 picks were determined by the lottery, not all of them. Each team had the same probabilities for each of the top 3 picks, but the remaining order after the top 3 picks would be determined by the inverse of the standings. Under this system, teams could only draw 3 spots from their initial lottery seed. Here is a table showing the probability that each team had of getting each pick and the expected pick value for each team. This is the first draft lottery where the expected pick values are actually different between the teams. The Spurs ended up picking first overall, the Suns picked second, and the Nets picked third. In 1988, the Clippers won the first overall pick, the Pacers won the second overall pick, and the 76ers won the third overall pick. The Clippers and Pacers were the really big winners in this lottery. The 1989 lottery was similarly structured, but now it included 9 teams, so each team had a 1 in 9 chance of getting each of the top 3 picks. This is our table showing all of the probabilities. The Kings ended up winning the first pick, the Clippers got the second pick, and the Spurs won the third overall pick. Up until now, the lottery picks have been completely unweighted. Each team had an equal chance of picking in the top 3, regardless of where they finished in the regular season. However, all of that changed in 1990, and the lottery system was modified so that it would benefit the worst teams more. Under this system, each of the non-playoff teams gets a certain number of chances to win the first overall pick, represented by a number of balls. The worst team gets 11 balls, the second worst team gets 10 balls, the third worst team gets 9 balls, and so on, all the way up to the team with the worst lottery odds getting 1 ball. This would give us a total of 66 balls, so the worst team would have an 11 in 66 chance of winning, the second worst team would have a 10 in 66 chance, and so on. There are a total of 3 lotteries. If a team that already won the lottery gets picked for the second or third lottery, a redraw is conducted. So, for the 1990 draft lottery, this is what the probability table looked like. The last place New Jersey Nets won the first lottery, the 10th last Seattle Supersonics won the second lottery, and the second last Miami Heat won the third lottery. Seattle and New Jersey were obviously the huge winners here. Then, for the next 4 years, the lotteries were very similar. In 1991, the 5th-seeded Charlotte Hornets, 4th-seeded Nets, and 3rd-seeded Kings won the first, second, and third overall pick respectively. Then, in 1992, the 2nd-seeded Orlando Magic moved up to 1, the 8th-seeded Charlotte Hornets moved up to 2, and the last place Minnesota Timberwolves won the third lottery. This was a huge lottery, as Shaquille O'Neal was available and was the clear first overall pick. Then, in 1993, one of the most notorious lotteries in league history took place. The Orlando Magic, originally slated to pick 11th, won a 1 in 66 lottery to move up to first, giving them their second first overall pick in as many years, and their second lottery win in their first 5 years as a franchise. This is going to create a huge domino effect in the future. The 76ers moved up from 5th to 2nd, and the Warriors moved up from 7th to 3rd. Moving on, in 1994 we had one of the most boring lotteries to date. The Milwaukee Bucks moved up from 4th to the first overall pick, the last place Dallas Mavericks won the second pick, and the second last place Detroit Pistons won the third pick. Then, in 1995, 2 new expansion franchises were introduced, the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies. Because the other GMs were so annoyed that the Orlando Magic entered the league and immediately started to win lotteries, David Stern decided to take out his frustrations on the entire nation of Canada and everything it represents, by giving the Raptors and Grizzlies very unfavorable lottery rules. In 1995, the Grizzlies and the Raptors were locked into the 6th and 7th selections, and who picked where was determined by a coin flip that the Grizzlies ended up winning. The rest of the lottery was done normally. So, the 5th-seeded Warriors won the first pick, the Clippers moved from 1st to 2nd, and the 76ers moved up from 4th to 3rd. In 1996, the Canadian teams weren't screwed over quite as much, but they still weren't given a fair shot. I could explain these restrictions, but I think it'd be funner if I showed the explanation from the actual cheesy 90s-style broadcast that took place.
On now to the rules. The lottery is a weighted system that gives the teams with the poorest records the best chance of securing the top picks. The teams draw for those top 3 selections. The remaining positions are slotted based on regular season records. Under the terms of their expansion agreements, the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies will take part in the lottery, but neither is eligible for the first pick in the draft. The best either can do is the second overall pick. Therefore, among the 13 teams in the lottery, the team with the best chance of securing the first pick is Philadelphia. They have a slightly better than 33% chance of getting it. The team in the lottery with the least chance of getting the number 1 pick is Charlotte, which just missed the playoffs, and therefore the Hornets have less than a 1% chance of getting the top pick. Now, a couple of other notes. Philadelphia has the right to swap its own first-round pick for Toronto's as part of the Sharon Wright trade. If Golden State's pick is one of the top 3, Orlando will receive that pick, and Golden State will get Orlando's pick, all part of trades involving Chris Webber. And finally, the Cleveland Cavaliers own Washington's first-round pick, which they received as part of the Mark Price transaction.
The 76ers won the first overall pick, the Raptors won the second overall pick, and the Grizzlies won the third overall pick. Allen Iverson ended up being selected first overall. 1997 had the exact same restrictions as 1996, so even though the Grizzlies finished last in the NBA, they couldn't pick first overall and select Tim Duncan. The third-seeded Spurs won the first overall pick, the 76ers ended up getting the second overall pick, and the Boston Celtics won the third overall pick. 1998 was the final year in which the Raptors and Grizzlies had no chance of winning the first overall pick. The third-seeded Clippers ended up getting the first pick, the fifth-seeded Grizzlies did win, going up from pick 5 to pick 2, and the first-seeded Nuggets ended up getting the third overall pick. In 1999, every team participating in the lottery had a chance to get the first overall pick. The third-seeded Bulls were the lucky team. They ended up getting the first overall pick. The last-place Grizzlies ended up getting the second pick, and the 13th-seeded Charlotte Hornets sprung all the way up to the third overall selection, so that's a really big jump. 2000's lottery saw the New Jersey Nets go from 7th to 1st, the Grizzlies go from 4th to 2nd, and the Clippers go from 1st to 3rd. There's not too much new to observe here. We're seeing the same teams in the same lottery structure. In 2001, the Washington Wizards won the draft lottery for the first time in franchise history, going from 3rd to 1st. The Clippers continued their run of picking high, going from 8th to 2nd, and the 3rd overall pick was won by the Atlanta Hawks, who were originally scheduled to pick 5th overall. 2002 at least saw some minor changes. The worst team had a slightly lower chance of winning the lottery, and the Grizzlies were now having awful seasons in Memphis rather than Vancouver. The Houston Rockets won the first pick, moving up from 5 to 1. The last place Chicago Bulls won the second pick, and the second-seeded Golden State Warriors ended up getting the 3rd overall pick. 2003 was arguably the biggest lottery that we will discuss today, due to LeBron James being the unequivocal best player in the draft. The top 3 picks in this draft belonged to the 6th-seeded Memphis Grizzlies, the 2nd-seeded Denver Nuggets, and the 1st-seeded Cleveland Cavaliers. Denver got the 3rd pick, Memphis got the 2nd pick, and Cleveland got the 1st overall pick, and the ability to draft LeBron James. As LeBron James was an Ohio native, there was speculation that this lottery was also fixed, but there is no evidence of it, and not even a reasonable theory like the chilled envelope of 1985. In 2004, the Charlotte franchise was resurrected, originally named the Bobcats but later named to the Hornets. And after what happened to Toronto and Vancouver in the 90s, the league decided to go a little easier on them. This year, Charlotte was locked into the 4th overall selection. They couldn't move up, they couldn't move down. The last place Orlando Magic retained their 1st overall pick, the 5th-seeded Clippers moved up to 2, and the 2nd-seeded Chicago Bulls won the 3rd overall pick. In 2005, the Charlotte Bobcats were actually capable of winning a lottery in their 2nd year as a franchise, and had no restrictions like Toronto and Vancouver did. Nonetheless, they did not win the lottery. Milwaukee moved up from 6 to 1, Atlanta moved from 1 to 2, and Portland moved from 4 to 3. 2006's lottery had no interesting quirks. The 5th-seeded Raptors won the 1st overall pick, the Knicks stayed at 2 but the pick was transferred to Chicago, and the Bobcats stayed at pick 3. 2007's lottery saw the Trailblazers move from 7th to 1st, the Supersonics move from 5th to 2nd, and the Hawks move from 4th to 3rd. In 2008, there was a big jump. The 8th-seeded Chicago Bulls won the 1st overall pick and ended up picking Chicago native Derrick Rose. I'm sure many people had their tinfoil hats out for this one as well. The 2nd overall pick went to the last place Miami Heat, and the 3rd overall pick went to the 3rd-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves. At this point, it has been quite a while since the lottery has undergone any major changes, and in 2009, it remained quite similar. This was the first lottery that the Oklahoma City Thunder participated in following their relocation from Seattle. This year, the Clippers moved up from 3rd to 1 and eventually ended up selecting Blake Griffin. The Grizzlies moved up from 6 to 2, and the Thunder moved up from 4 to 3. Moving on to 2010, the Wizards moved up from 5 to 1, and they eventually ended up selecting Jonathan Wall. The 6th-class 76ers won the 2nd pick, and the last-place Nets ended up getting the 3rd overall pick. 2011 was kinda interesting, as 2 of the top 3 picks were obtained in trades. The Utah Jazz, with a pick originally obtained from New Jersey, moved up to 3. The Minnesota Timberwolves, originally slated to pick 1st, ended up getting bumped down to 2nd, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, with a pick obtained from the LA Clippers, ended up picking 1st and selecting Kyrie Irving. 2012 was another big lottery, with Anthony Davis as the favorite to be picked 1st overall. This lottery didn't see too much movement. The 4th-seeded Pelicans moved up to 1st, and teams seeded 1, 2, or 3 were all bumped down 1 spot. 2013 saw a very familiar result. Cleveland won the 1st lottery, moving up from 3 to 1. Then, the last place Orlando Magic won the lottery for the 2nd pick, and the Wizards moved up from 8 to 3. These are all teams who have had a fair amount of lottery luck in the past. Now, if you're keeping track, Cleveland has participated in 6 lotteries since 2003, and has won the 1st overall pick 3 times. Surely their luck is run out, right? Apparently not, because the Cavaliers moved up from 9 to 1 in 2014. Every other team ahead of them was bumped down exactly 1 spot. Cleveland had an extremely good run of lottery luck after the departure of LeBron James, and this helped them return to contention quickly following LeBron's return. Cleveland wasn't around to ruin the lottery in 2015, so we get to see some new faces here. The last place Timberwolves retained their 1st pick. The Lakers moved up from 4 to 2, and the 3rd-seeded 76ers stayed at that spot. In the next season, the Philadelphia 76ers went 10-72, and displayed some of the most blatant tanking in league history, and it even had a nickname, The Process. 2016 made draft lottery history. It was the first time that the draft order didn't change at all. The 76ers picked 1st, the Lakers picked 2nd, and the Celtics picked 3rd, following the infamous Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce trade with the Brooklyn Nets. In 2017, the Celtics continued to benefit from this trade. They had the best seed in the 2017 lottery, and they won the 1st overall pick. The Lakers moved up from pick 3 to pick 2, ultimately fulfilling LeVar Ball's prophecy, and the Sacramento Kings moved up from 8 to 3. However, I am considering this pick to belong to the Philadelphia 76ers, because they had the right to swap first-round picks with Sacramento due to a prior trade. 2018 was a slightly more normal lottery with less pick movement at the top. The last place Phoenix Suns retained the 1st overall pick and eventually ended up selecting DeAndre Ayton. Sacramento moved up from the 7th to 2nd overall pick and actually got to keep their pick this time, and then the 3rd overall pick went to Atlanta, who was originally scheduled to pick 4th. In 2019, after 20 years of a fairly similar lottery structure, the NBA finally made a substantial change. Likely inspired by teams such as the 76ers of the mid-2010s, the NBA tweaked the odds and the number of picks available so that the worst teams had less of a chance of winning the lottery or picking high in general. Instead of 3 lottery picks being available, 4 were available, and the bottom 3 teams all had the exact same odds, a 14% chance of winning first overall. In the 2019 lottery, there was already some pretty significant movement in the draft order. New Orleans moved up from 7-1, Memphis moved up from 8-2, the last place New York Knicks secured the 3rd pick, and the Lakers moved up from 11-4. 2020's lottery wasn't quite as weird. The Timberwolves moved up from 3-1, the Warriors moved from 1-2, the Hornets moved from 8-3, and the Bulls, originally slated to pick 7th, won the 4th overall pick. In 2021, 7 showed that it was the lucky number once again, with the Raptors moving up from pick 7 to pick 4. Cleveland moved from 5-3, Houston moved from pick 1 to pick 2, and Detroit moved from pick 2 to pick 1. 2022 continued this crazy run for 7, as this time the Sacramento Kings jumped from pick 7 to pick 4. In terms of the top 3 picks, Houston picked 3rd, Oklahoma City picked 2nd, and Orlando picked 1st. 2023 was a massive lottery, with Victor Wembanyama breaking into the league. 7's luck finally ran out, and the lower lottery seeds in general didn't have a terrific year. The 3rd-seeded Spurs won the 1st overall, the Hornets moved from pick 4 to pick 2, the 5th-seeded Trailblazers ended up getting the 3rd overall pick, and the 2nd-seeded Houston Rockets picked 4th. The last-place Detroit Pistons had the misfortune of being the first team ever to fall from pick 1 to pick 5 under this new system. Now, in 2024, you figure that Detroit would be more fortunate, right? Absolutely not. The exact same thing happened. They ended up picking 5th despite being the worst team in the league. The Spurs moved up from 5-4, the Rockets moved up from 9th to 3rd with a pick obtained from Brooklyn. The Wizards stayed at pick 2, and the Hawks moved all the way up from pick 10 to pick 1. And, most recently, the 2025 lottery had some wild movement. The Mavericks, originally scheduled to pick 11th, won the 1st overall pick with less than a 2% chance. The Spurs won the lottery pick for the 3rd straight year, going from 8th to 2nd. Philadelphia moved up from 5th to 3rd, and the 3rd-seeded Hornets ended up picking 4th. For the 3rd straight year, the worst team, this time the Utah Jazz, ended up picking 5th. So, we have officially looked at every NBA lottery ever. We now have all of the information needed to crunch the numbers, and we'll be able to see who has benefited the most from the lottery and who has been screwed over the most by the lottery. I'm about to show the sums of the pick values above expected for every single team. Take a guess at who the unluckiest and luckiest teams have been in the comments section. Now, here is all the information we have. I have quadruple checked this, and I believe that there are no major errors here. The Philadelphia 76ers have had the best lottery luck in the entire NBA. San Antonio, Cleveland, and Orlando don't lag too far behind. On the flip side, Denver is considered the team with the worst lottery luck. Sacramento, Minnesota, Washington, and Detroit have also had a fair amount of misfortune. In terms of individual lottery results, the unluckiest result was actually a two-way tie between the 1986 Mavericks and the 1985 Warriors. If you recall, those were the teams that ended up picking 7th in the completely unweighted lotteries, and the pick value above expected here was minus 16.1984. The luckiest team, unsurprisingly, was the 1993 Orlando Magic, winning the 1st overall pick as the 11th seed. This lottery win gave an astonishing pick value above expected of 57.9366. One other question you may be asking yourself is, what lottery system is the most effective at preventing teams from tanking? There were many different lottery systems, and some were more favorable to the bad teams. Here is a graph showing the expected pick value for the worst team in the NBA in every year from 1985 to 2025. As we can see, the lottery first started out rather unfavorable for the worst teams, with an expected pick value corresponding to that of the 3rd or 4th overall pick. Then, towards the 90s, the worst teams were given more favorable odds, and their expected pick value was often in the 70s, close to the pick value of the 2nd overall pick. However, starting in 2019, the new lottery system became far less favorable for the bad teams, and their expected pick value was similar to those teams in the original 1985 and 1986 lotteries. In case you're wondering, those 2 dips in the 1990s come from the Vancouver Grizzlies, who were not eligible to win the 1st overall pick in those years, despite being the last place team. Well, there we have it. We have looked through every single NBA lottery and found a ton of cool information along the way. If you like this sort of content, I recommend subscribing. I'm trying to make a collection of videos linking math and professional sports, and I'm open to other interesting suggestions.